Dad, please, I can't marry him. I love Oliver.
No, you must marry him. He is a good man. Forget Oliver.
Oliver is a good man, but Raymond has done a lot for us. Please consider him.
And so she married him. But this is not how the story began. It all started this way.
The first time Rose truly understood that love and survival were not the same thing, she was 21 years old, sitting in a hospital corridor that smelled of antiseptic and old fear, listening to a doctor explain in careful, measured language that her mother's kidneys were failing. She didn't cry. She had already done the crying on the bus ride over, pressed against the window so the other passengers wouldn't see. By the time she sat across from the consultant, she had the expression of a woman twice her age, composed, attentive, taking notes on a small pad with a pen borrowed from reception. "What are the options?" she asked. The doctor talked for 15 minutes. Rose listened, wrote down numbers she barely understood, thanked him, stood up, walked back to her mother's ward with even, deliberate steps, sat beside the bed, took her mother's dry hand in both of hers and said, in a voice she kept completely steady, "We're going to fix this, Mum." Her mother, Harriet, looked at her with eyes already tired from fighting. "Rose, we're going to fix it," she said again. She believed it when she said it. That was the thing about Rose at 21. She could believe almost anything if she said it firmly enough. The house Rose went home to that evening was the kind of quiet that has weight to it. Her father, Thomas, was in his armchair by the window, as he almost always was, not because he was lazy, which he had never been in his life, but because his eyes had been failing for 2 years, and the world had gradually shrunk to the distance his vision could manage. He was 63, had worked a factory floor for 30 years, and had been told a year before his retirement that the cataracts were advanced but operable. The operation cost money they had never quite assembled. So Thomas sat by the window and tilted his face toward whatever light came through the glass and pretended he could see more than he could. And nobody said the word cataract in the house anymore, because saying it meant admitting they hadn't fixed it. "How is she?" he asked, hearing Rose come in. He couldn't see her face from across the room. "Resting," she said, hung her coat on the hook by the door. "She's comfortable." He nodded. He knew he heard what she wasn't saying. He always had. Her elder brother, Frederick, was at the kitchen table, his laptop open, a mug of tea gone cold beside it. He was 24, had graduated 2 years ago with a degree in logistics and supply chain management, and had been job hunting for 16 months. Not for lack of trying. He sent applications like other people sent prayers, daily, urgently, with diminishing confidence in the answer. He looked up when Rose came in. "Well," he said. She sat down across from him. She told him what the consultant had told her, the failing kidneys, the treatment required, the facility abroad that the consultant had mentioned carefully, the way doctors mention things they know are out of reach. Frederick listened with his elbows on the table and his hands pressed together. When she finished, he closed his laptop. "How much?" he asked. She told him. The silence between them had the particular texture of two people looking at a number and knowing, without saying so, that it might as well be written in a language neither of them spoke. "I'm still waiting to hear back from Harton Logistics," Frederick said, finally. "I know. If they call..." "Frederick," she kept her voice gentle, "it's been 3 weeks." He pressed his hands over his face. She got up and put the kettle on. She stood at the counter in the thin kitchen light doing the calculations she'd been doing since the hospital corridor. Every combination, every angle, every number she could move and every one she couldn't. The numbers didn't change. She made 2 cups of tea and brought one to Frederick. She left the figures face down on the counter where she knew exactly where they were. Oliver found her outside the university library that morning. He always seemed to find her. One of the first things she'd noticed about him 2 years ago at a freshman social where he'd appeared at her shoulder with 2 cups of bad punch and the confidence of someone more nervous than he looked. He'd introduced himself. She told him her name, and he'd repeated it carefully. "Rose," he said. "That's a good name." "Is it?" she said. It's a name that means something, he said seriously. And she laughed, and they talked for 3 hours. She'd loved him almost immediately, which had alarmed her, because Rose didn't do things immediately. She calculated, assessed, decided. She did not fall. But with Oliver, she had fallen anyway, completely and without warning, and 2 years in, she was still slightly startled by the fact of it. He was sitting on the low wall outside the library that morning, a book open on his knee when she came down the steps. He looked up. One look at her face and he closed the book. What happened? She sat beside him, told him everything. The consultant, the numbers, the kidneys, the facility abroad that the consultant had mentioned carefully, the way doctors mention things they know are out of reach. Oliver listened the way he always did, fully, without interrupting, without offering solutions before she'd finished. When she finished talking, he was quiet for a moment. Then he reached for her hand. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" She looked at him. "Okay, then we figure it out together." She looked at his face, this boy she loved with the worn elbows on his jacket and the second-hand books and the warmth in his eyes that made the whole world feel slightly less dangerous. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe him so badly it almost hurt. "Oliver," she said carefully, "the number." "I know the number." He squeezed her hand. "I don't have it yet, but there has to be a way." She pressed her lips together and nodded. She let him hold her hand. She did not tell him she'd already stopped believing in yet. Raymond Ashford came into Rose's life the way most catastrophic things do, quietly and through someone she trusted. He was 41 years old, a property developer with interests across 3 cities, and he had been pointed in her direction by her Aunt Cynthia, who knew everyone, owed favors to everyone, and had long believed that Rose's quiet intelligence deserved far better circumstances than the ones life had issued her. "He's a decent man," Aunt Cynthia said on the phone, with the tone of a woman who had already decided the matter. "He asked about the family. He wants to help." "Why would a stranger want to help our family?" Rose said. A pause. "Because some people can, darling, and occasionally one of them does." Rose agreed to one dinner. She took the bus to the restaurant. She didn't have a car, had never had a car, and had become practiced at arriving places, looking like someone who had not just spent 40 minutes on public transport. She walked in and identified Raymond Ashford immediately, the only man sitting alone who looked entirely at ease about it. He was not what she'd expected. She had expected either a benefactor's bluster or a predator's charm. He was neither. He was measured, and he arrived at the restaurant before her, and he stood to shake her hand with the manner of someone conducting a meeting they had genuinely prepared for. He was direct from the first exchange. "I know your situation," he said, once they'd ordered. "Your mother's condition, what the treatment costs, what your family has." Rose kept her face neutral. And I'd like to help," he said. She set down her water glass. "Why?" He considered the question without rushing it. "Because I can," he said, "and because I have been in a situation where the help that would have changed everything arrived too late. I don't wish that on anyone." A pause. "Your aunt speaks highly of you. I find that I am interested in where you will go." "That's generous," Rose said carefully, "but I don't take money from strangers." "I'm not here to give you money," he said. "I'm here to understand what your family needs, and then, if I can address those needs directly to the institutions, to the providers, not to you personally, I will." "And what do you want in return?" He looked at her steadily. "The chance to know you," he said. "Nothing forced, nothing rushed, simply the chance." She held his gaze. "I'll think about it," she said. "Of course," he said, and opened his menu. She thought about it on the 40-minute bus ride home. She thought about her mother in the hospital bed, her father tilting his face toward the light, Frederick staring at a laptop that never rang with good news. She thought about her own final year, the letter from the university that had arrived 3 weeks ago, sitting in the bottom of her bag like a small grenade. She thought about Oliver, about his hand on hers outside the library, about the word yet. At her stop, she got off and stood on the pavement and made herself be honest. There was no yet. There was only now, and now was a number she couldn't reach on her own. She went home. She didn't tell Oliver about the dinner. The second meeting was at Aunt Cynthia's house 2 weeks later. Raymond arrived with a folder. He had found out about the university letter. She didn't know how, and she would wonder about that later, but he laid it on the table with the matter-of-fact directness she was coming to recognize as his manner. "Your final year tuition fees," he said. "The university's deadline is next month, after which they withhold your registration for 12 months. She felt heat rise in her face. "How do you know about that?" "I asked," he said simply. "I needed the full picture." He met her eyes. "I'm not here to embarrass you. I need to know everything that needs helping." She looked at the letter, her own name on the envelope. "I was going to figure something out," she said. "I know, but you don't have to find this one alone." "I'd like to pay the fees," he said, "directly to the university, before the deadline." He paused. "No strings. Your education belongs to you regardless of whatever we become." She was quiet for a long moment. "All right," she said. He paid the fees the following week. She finished her exams without the underground terror of an unpayable deadline. She told herself this was a practical arrangement. She told herself she was managing a situation. She did not tell Oliver. The third thing came a month later, and this one undid something in her that she hadn't known was held together. Raymond called her on a Tuesday morning, businesslike as always. "I've arranged an interview for your brother, Harton and Cross Logistics, Friday at 2. The herring manager is expecting him." She stood very still in the kitchen. "Frederick?" she said. "He sent his CV through the standard channel 8 weeks ago. It was good. It wasn't seen by the right person. I've ensured it will be." "That's—" she stopped. "He gets the interview on merit. What he does with it is entirely his own." She sat down at the kitchen table. "And there's one more thing," Raymond said, and something in his voice shifted slightly, quieter, more careful. "I'd like to arrange for your father to see a specialist about his eyes. The cataracts are operable. There's a surgeon I know who can see him next week if Thomas is willing." She pressed her hand flat on the kitchen table. "Rose," he said. "Yes," she said. Her voice had gone slightly strange. "Yes, he'll be willing." She ended the call. She sat at the table for a long time. She was not stupid. She understood what was happening, the careful, incremental way this man was making himself indispensable, building a structure of obligation that no member of her family would be able to stand outside of and remain comfortable. She understood the architecture of it. She also understood that her father was going to see again. She pressed both hands over her mouth. She held them there. Then she got up, went to her father's armchair, and told him. Thomas was quiet for a moment when she finished. Then he reached up and found her hand without being able to see it clearly, and held it. "Good girl," he said. His voice was rough. She did not cry. She was very good at that by now. Frederick got the job. He came home from the Friday interview walking differently. Taller, or something like taller. The particular posture of a man who has been handed back a piece of himself he'd been missing for 16 months. He sat down at the kitchen table and told Rose and their father the details, the role, the salary, the start date, the office near the city center. Thomas, who could now read the newspaper again for the first time in 2 years, Raymond's surgeon had operated 3 weeks prior, quietly and efficiently, and Thomas had wept in the recovery room when the blurriness lifted, looked at his son's face and smiled so widely Rose had to look away. "Good," Thomas said. "Good. That's how it should be." "Mr. Raymond's contact," Frederick began. "You earned it," Thomas said firmly. "The contact opened the door. You walked through it yourself. Don't let anyone take that from you." Rose watched this exchange from the kitchen doorway and thought about Oliver. Oliver, who still didn't know about any of it, who still came to meet her between lectures, who still texted her at odd hours with articles he'd found interesting, who still held her hand on the walk back from campus with the ease of someone who believed the future was a place they were walking toward together. She had been telling herself she was waiting for the right time. She was becoming aware that she was simply afraid. The food arrived for the first time in mid-November. A delivery, addressed to the house, from a supplier Rose didn't recognize. She opened the door to find two men with a trolley loaded with provisions: rice, oil, flour, tins, vegetables, a whole chicken wrapped in paper, things the family had been buying in small, careful quantities for years. There was a card. For the household. Monthly unless you tell me otherwise. R. She stood in the doorway holding the card. Her mother, home from the hospital now and recovering, came slowly into the hallway and looked at the trolley and then at Rose's face. "He sent this?" Harriet said. "Yes," Rose said. Her mother was quiet for a moment. "He is a good man, Rose," she said. "Mum, I'm not telling you what to do." Harriet's voice was firm but gentle. "I'm only telling you what I see." Rose stacked the provisions in the kitchen with careful, mechanical movements. She did not think about what she was feeling. She had become, over the last several months, very practiced at not thinking about what she was feeling. She texted Oliver, "Are you free tonight?" He replied in 30 seconds, "Always for you. The cafe?" She put her phone in her pocket. She went to the cafe. She did not tell him about the food delivery. She sat across from him and watched his face while he talked about his architecture project, a community center design he'd been working on for a class, the one he'd been sketching in the margins of his notebooks for weeks. And she thought, this is the person I love, this person right here. She thought, I am going to lose him. She thought, I don't know if I have a choice. She ordered a second coffee she didn't drink. When he walked her to the bus stop, because she had never had a car, and Oliver had always walked her to the bus stop, he kissed her at the corner with the particular warmth of someone who has no idea anything is wrong. "You're quiet tonight," he said. "Tired," she said. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Sleep well," he said. She got on the bus. She pressed her face against the window. Raymond arranged the surgery the following month. He came to the house first, had asked specifically to come to the house. Rose had cleaned with anxious thoroughness, but Raymond arrived and sat in their sitting room and drank the tea Harriet made him with a complete absence of performance. He talked to Thomas about his eyes, about the factory, about the logistics industry where Frederick had just started. He was at ease in a way Rose hadn't expected, and she watched her family respond to it, her father sitting straighter, Frederick's jaw unclenching, her mother's eyes going soft, and she understood clearly and without comfort that Raymond had done something no amount of money could manufacture. He had made her family feel like people who mattered. The surgery was in Germany. Harriet flew on a Tuesday. Rose would have gone, but Raymond had arranged for Aunt Cynthia to accompany her. He'd paid for that too, quietly, when Rose mentioned her aunt was the person her mother would want beside her. Rose stayed home with her father, who could not travel, and the two of them sat in the sitting room on the night of the operation and waited. Thomas prayed quietly. Rose made tea and forgot to drink it. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Aunt Cynthia rang. The surgery had gone well. The prognosis was excellent. Thomas bowed his head and said something too quiet for Rose to hear. Rose sat on the floor of the sitting room, back against the sofa, and let the tears come at last. Months of relief and grief and guilt and gratitude, all at the same temperature, indistinguishable from each other. When she finally picked up her phone, there was a message from Oliver. "Thinking of you tonight. Whatever you need, I'm here." She stared at those words for a long time. Then she put the phone face down and pressed both hands over her eyes. The gratitude settled over her family like weather. Rose watched it happen in the weeks after her mother came home from Germany. The way Raymond's name was said in the house, how it carried a different weight now, a reverence that the family hadn't collectively offered to anyone in as long as she could remember. Not just Aunt Cynthia, who had always liked him, all of them. Her mother was the first to speak plainly. It was an evening in December, the two of them alone in the kitchen, while Harriet sat slowly improving, stronger each week, able to stay at the table through dinner now and to laugh properly, the full laugh, not the careful, conserved version she'd been using for years. She looked at Rose over the washing up and said, "He's done too much for us." "I know," Rose said. "I don't mean it as a complaint, my darling." Harriet set down a cup. "I mean it as a fact. A man doesn't do what he's done for a family unless he has strong feelings. He's been kind. Rose, her mother's voice was gentle but direct. He paid your fees. He got your brother his job. He fixed your father's eyes. He sends food every month. He flew me to Germany. She paused. This isn't kindness. Kindness is a cup of tea in the listening ear. This is a man who has decided your family is his family, and the reason for that is sitting in front of me. Rose looked at the water in the sink. You're not pressuring me, she said carefully. No, Harriet said. I'm telling you what I see. What you do with it is your own. She picked up the towel. But I want you to see it clearly, not through the fog of whatever you think you owe Oliver. I love Oliver, Rose said, quietly but without wavering. I know you do. Harriet folded the towel. Love isn't always enough, Rose. I loved your father when we married, and love kept us going through the years when nothing else did. But love alone didn't keep the lights on. It didn't send Frederick to university. It doesn't fix eyes or kidneys. She looked at her daughter. I am not telling you to be mercenary. I am telling you to be wise. Rose didn't answer. She dried the cups. Frederick came to her room that same week. He knocked, which he rarely did. He sat on the edge of her desk chair with the expression she recognized as his serious face, worn through all the job rejection months. I want to say something, he said. Then say it. Raymond. He paused. I know how you feel about Oliver, but think about what our family looked like this time last year. Dad not able to see, Mom getting worse, me with nothing coming in, you holding everything together on a student budget. He looked up. We were sinking, Rose, slowly and quietly. I know, she said. Raymond didn't throw money at us, Frederick said. He looked at each actual problem and solved it, one by one. That's not a man showing off. That's a man who gives a damn. He held her gaze. I spent 16 months loving this family and not being able to do a thing. I know what that costs the people waiting. Don't mistake feeling for providing. They're different things. So you think I should marry him? I think you should consider him, not as the man who helped us, as the man he actually is. He stood up. That's all. And left. Her father spoke to her the next morning. Thomas waited until Rose had sat down with her coffee, then set down his newspaper. I'm not a man who meddles, but I'll say this once. He looked at her with the clear eyes that were still slightly miraculous to her. Raymond Ashford is a good man. I know the difference between a man who performs goodness and one who has it in him. He has it. He paused. I'm not asking you to stop loving whoever you love. I'm asking you to consider him fully, with honest eyes. He picked up his paper. That's all. Rose sat there after he returned to reading, her coffee going cold. She thought about Oliver, the bus stop, his hand in her hair. She thought about a woman who could only love the boy who couldn't change her life, and a family given back its future by a man whose feelings she wasn't sure she could return. She sat for a long time. Then she called Oliver. Hey, he said, warm and easy. You all right? Yes, she said. I just wanted to hear your voice. You've got it. I'm here. She pressed the phone against her cheek and held on to the sound of him for a little longer. She told Raymond yes on a Thursday afternoon in late January. They were in his car, the first time she'd ever been in a car with him, which struck her as strange, that she'd been meeting this man for 4 months and had never ridden in a car with him until now. He had picked her up from the bus stop near her house, which she suspected was not accidental. He had noticed she didn't have a car. He had come to her. She told him she needed to talk. He'd driven to a quiet road near the park and stopped the car and looked at her. I need to know, she said, what this actually means, if I agree. What it means for my family, for me, what you actually want. A marriage, he said, a home, a life built with someone I respect and intend to love properly. He paused. I'm not asking you to come with nothing. I know what you bring. I know who you are. You barely know me, she said. I know what matters, he said. The rest I want to learn. She looked out the window. A woman was walking a dog on the path through the park. I don't love you, she said. The words came out quietly, but she meant them to land where they landed. I want you to know that. I'm not going to lie to you about it. He was quiet for a moment. I know that, he said. I didn't come to force you or to buy your feelings, but I believe that honesty and time and genuine effort can build something. I would rather start with truth than with performance. She nodded slowly. If I agree, she said, I need you to tell me this is your last word on the matter. No pressure, no revisiting. My decision made freely. Freely, he said. I mean that. She turned to look at him. All right, she said. Yes. He held her gaze. Thank you, he said. I will not make you regret it. She believed he meant that too. She just didn't know, yet, what the regret would actually look like. She didn't tell Oliver. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment. She told herself she owed him a proper conversation, a real one, not a phone call. She told herself a week, and the week passed, and she told herself another week. The engagement was announced, quietly within the family first, then widening, and she had still not spoken to Oliver. He found out through someone else. She never knew who, a mutual acquaintance, a friend of a friend, the particular efficiency with which information travels in small overlapping circles. She was at home on a Saturday morning when her phone rang. His name on the screen. She stared at it for 3 rings. She answered. Rose? His voice was different, flat in a way she'd never heard from him. Oliver? Tell me it isn't true. He said it without inflection, as though he'd rehearsed the calmness. Tell me what I just heard isn't true. She closed her eyes. Oliver. Rose. The calm cracked slightly, just slightly. Tell me it isn't true. She pressed her hand to her forehead. Can we talk in person? Are you engaged to Raymond Ashford? The silence came next. Yes, she said. The pause that followed was the longest she'd ever experienced on a phone. I need to see you, he said. Today. Oliver. Today, Rose, please. They met at the park near the bus stop, not the cafe, because the cafe felt too ordinary for this. He was there when she arrived, standing on the path with his hands in his pockets, and he looked at her the way she'd been terrified he would, not with anger, which she could have handled, but with a devastation so quiet and complete it was almost worse to witness. How long? He said. I told him yes 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks, he exhaled. And before that, the meetings with him? 4 months, she said. He turned away, walked a few steps, stopped. 4 months, he said to the path. You were with me while... Nothing happened between us. He was helping my family. I know what he was doing. He turned back, and now there was heat in his eyes, grief and frustration burning at the same temperature. I know exactly what he was doing, Rose. I know he was making himself impossible to refuse. And I know that's not entirely on you. I know what your family's been dealing with. His voice dropped. But you were meeting him for 4 months, and you never told me. I thought we were building something. We were. Then how do you stand here and tell me you're marrying someone else? Because my mother almost died. The words tore out of the months of restraint. She lowered her voice. Because my father couldn't see, and my brother couldn't work, and I was 1 letter from losing my final year. Because the numbers didn't add up, no matter how many ways I arranged them. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright. Because I love you, and love does not pay for surgery. Love doesn't put food on the table or get a job for a man who's been sending applications into nothing for a year over. I needed someone who could act, and you couldn't. You knew it. He looked at her. The words sat between them. You should have told me, he said, quiet, broken. I know, she whispered. I'm sorry. Don't apologize like this is a minor thing. He pressed his mouth for a moment. Oliver, I love you. I have loved you for 2 years. Is there any part of you that wants to not do this? Yes, she said immediately. He stared at her. Every part of me that is only about me, that part wants to stay right here and figure it out and believe it's enough. I felt the first tear and didn't wipe it. But I am not only about me. I never have been, and you know that better than anyone. He looked at her. The words sat between them. Is he forcing you? He said quietly. No, she said. He's never forced anything. Then it's your family. She nodded once. He made a sound that wasn't quite a word. He pressed both hands over his face, and she watched his shoulders shake once, just once, and then steady. When he lowered his hands, his eyes were wet. I should have done more, he said. I told you I'd find a way, and I didn't. I know that. He looked at her. But I need you to hear this before you go through with it. Oliver, you are the most remarkable person I have ever known, and I have loved every version of you I've been given, and I will spend a long time, he stopped, a long time not being all right about this. She was crying properly now. He stepped forward and pulled her in, and she held on with both arms, and he pressed his face into her hair, and they stood on the park path in January, with the cold air moving around them, and the world indifferent to the fact that something was ending. I love you, she said into his shoulder. I know, he said. I love you too. He held her a moment longer. Then he stepped back. He looked at her face. He nodded once, as though confirming something to himself. Then he turned and walked away down the path, and she watched until the path bent and he was gone. She stood there for a long time. Then she walked to the bus stop. The bus was 7 minutes late. She stood and waited for it in the cold. They married in April, when the first warm weather came. It was not the wedding Rose had imagined as a girl, not the slightly chaotic, overloud, deeply joyful event she and Oliver had once half-jokingly sketched out on a napkin at the cafe when they were 19 and the future felt like something they'd build with their own hands. This wedding was organized and elegant and attended by people who wore the right things and said the right words in the right order. Raymond had arranged everything with the precision he brought to all things. The flowers were perfect, the food was exceptional, the venue was the kind of place that appeared in magazines. Her mother cried from the second row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief Rose had never seen before. Frederick gave a toast so warm and genuine, it made the room laugh and then go quiet in the way of people who have just heard something true. Aunt Cynthia sat in the third row, looking triumphant, which was perhaps fitting since she had started all of this. Rose stood at the altar and said the words and meant them, at least the ones about commitment and care and faithfulness, which she meant with her whole self. The other words, the ones about love, she said more quietly. Raymond didn't seem to notice the difference. He was looking at her the way he always looked at her, with the still, serious attention of a man who could not quite believe his luck. She smiled at him, a real smile, because she did not hate him. She never had. She kept her eyes from the one empty seat at the back of the room that nobody else would have noticed. The life Raymond had promised assembled itself around her in the months that followed, and she had not been prepared for the sheer completeness of it. She had grown up in a house where the heating was managed carefully and the food was bought with a mental running total, and shoes were replaced when they became unavoidable. She had thought she understood comfort. She had not understood it at all. Raymond's house was large and warm and filled with things chosen rather than settled for. She had her own dressing room, a room she stood in the first week and simply looked around, unable to locate the appropriate response. Her wardrobe filled gradually, dresses and colors she had never owned, shoes that were not practical, coats that were beautiful in the way that coats had never been beautiful to her before. She wore them with the slightly self-conscious pleasure of a woman still surprised by her own reflection. She drove now. Raymond had arranged the lessons before they were even engaged. He had noticed, of course, that she had always taken the bus, and then afterwards bought her a car without making anything of it. A silver car, quiet and smooth, the kind that made her feel, on certain mornings, like a version of herself she hadn't previously met. She drove the children to nursery. She drove to Sunday dinners at her parents' house and parked outside and watched her father come to the window to look, and the particular expression on his face, pride mixed with relief, mixed with something more complicated, never fully stopped affecting her. Raymond gave her gifts the way other men gave instructions, efficiently, thoughtfully, without ceremony. A watch on her birthday, earrings she mentioned once in passing, which appeared a week later in a small box on the kitchen counter. He was not a romantic in the way that films defined it. No grand gestures, no handwritten notes, no warm arms around her in the kitchen for the pleasure of it. He showed love the way he showed everything, through provision, through competence, through the reliable machinery of care. And she was grateful, genuinely, thoroughly, daily grateful. But gratitude is not the same thing as warmth, and warmth is not the same thing as love. And love, the specific, alive, nerve-ending kind that Rose had once known, was simply not a thing she could locate in herself when she looked at her husband. 2 children came. Petra, with Rose's eyes and Raymond's composure, arrived first, a quiet, watchful baby who grew into a quiet, watchful girl. Sam came 18 months later, rounder and louder, a child who seemed to have arrived with a settled joy that required no maintenance. Rose loved them ferociously. That love, at least, was uncomplicated. She was a good mother. She was a good wife by any observable measure. She smiled when it was required. She was very good at that by now. The marriage, behind the beautiful facade of it, worked like a machine that had never been asked to feel anything. Raymond was traditional in ways Rose had not fully grasped before they lived together. He believed in structure. He believed in roles. She managed the home and the children. He managed the finances and the external world. This was simply how things were arranged, and he did not see why it would be otherwise. When she mentioned tentatively in their second year that she might like to take a course, she had seen something about marketing online and thought she might be good at it, he had looked at her with the mild, genuine puzzlement of a man who heard an unnecessary suggestion. "You don't need to work, Rose." Not unkindly, simply as a fact. "I know," she said. "I want to." He'd looked at her for a moment. "You can join some charity committees, ladies' things." He hadn't meant to diminish her. She understood that. He had meant to provide, as he always provided, the most appropriate solution to the perceived problem. But she sat with that phrase, ladies' things, for several days afterwards, feeling its specific weight. She didn't bring up the course again. She did enroll in it quietly, late at night after the children were in bed and Raymond was in his study. She told herself she wasn't hiding it. She was simply not making an issue of it. As for intimacy, Raymond was not a cold man. He came to her when he came to her, with the same orderly reliability he brought to everything. It was not unpleasant. It was simply something that happened on a schedule she had come to recognize, initiated by him, concluded by him, and never once accompanied by the kind of language or tenderness that might have made her feel seen rather than serviced. She submitted to it without resentment and felt afterwards a loneliness so specific it had its own shape. She had read somewhere years ago that loneliness in a marriage is the most complete kind of loneliness. She understood that now in a way she could not have understood before living it. She lay beside this man who had saved her family and given her a beautiful life and bought her things before she knew she wanted them, and she searched herself regularly for the love that was supposed to grow, as her mother had promised it would, and she found warmth, she found care, and she found something adjacent to love, but not love itself. Never love itself. She kept her face arranged. She told no one.
She saw Oliver again 5 years into the marriage, on a Tuesday in November. She was at the bookshop near the city center, looking for something for Frederick's birthday, when she turned from a shelf and he was simply there, 3 feet away, a book in his hand, not yet looking up. She had 4 seconds to decide. She used them to breathe. "Oliver," she said. He looked up. 5 years had done what 5 years does, sharpened some things, softened others. His jaw was more defined, his bearing slightly different, more settled. The eyes were exactly the same. "Rose." He said her name with the careful neutrality of someone who had rehearsed for this moment and was now discovering that rehearsal doesn't help. They stood in the bookshop with 5 years of everything between them, and both tried, visibly, to be composed. "You look well," he said. "So do you." She meant it. He did. "Did you move back?" 8 months ago." He shifted the book slightly, uncertain what to do with his hands. "I started my own practice, architecture. Small, but—" He stopped. "Sorry, you didn't ask." "I didn't," she agreed. "But I'm glad." A pause. "You always wanted that." Something moved in his expression that he didn't manage to suppress in time. "Yeah," he said. "I did." They stood in the ambient hum of the bookshop, other people moving around them, and Rose became very aware of the ring on her left hand and the particular weight of the moment. She wanted to say something that would let them both breathe. She couldn't find it. "Well?" she said. "Yeah," he said. She walked to the till, paid for the book, and went outside into the gray November air. She stood on the pavement for a moment, her chest doing something she recognized and wished she didn't, and then she walked to where her car was parked 3 streets away, her silver car, that small daily proof of her changed life, and sat in it without starting the engine. She sat there for 10 minutes. Then she drove home. She did not tell Raymond. The first message came 4 days later, through a platform they'd both used at university. "Rose, I keep almost seeing you. I'm sorry for this. You don't have to reply. I just wanted to say, you look well. I hope you genuinely are." She read it at 11 at night in the kitchen, Raymond asleep upstairs, the house completely quiet around her. She put the phone face down on the table. She picked it up. She typed, "I am, thank you. I hope you are too." She should have stopped there. She didn't. They talked for 2 hours about his practice, the buildings he was designing, the neighborhood he'd moved back to, her children and how they made her laugh, a documentary they'd both watched the same week without knowing it. They talked the way they always had, easily, at the same frequency, finishing each other's half-formed thoughts without trying, laughing at the same beats. It felt like muscle memory. It felt like a language she had thought she'd forgotten and discovered she still spoke perfectly and fluently and with her whole self. At 1 a.m, she typed, "I have to sleep." He typed, "I know. Good night, Rose. She put her phone in her bag. She went upstairs. She lay down beside Raymond, who was breathing the deep, even rhythm of a man in a perfectly ordered life, and she stared at the ceiling and felt the hollow place in her chest, the one that had been there for 5 years, the one she had refused to name, filled with something warm and familiar and terrifying. She did not sleep for a long time. Raymond noticed something had changed. He said nothing. Raymond almost never said things directly. That had always been the particular architecture of their difficulty, the gap between what he observed and what he expressed. But she could feel his noticing in the quality of his silences at dinner, in the fraction of a second longer he held her gaze before looking away, in the precise way he asked, "How was your day?" that suggested the question was carrying more weight than it usually did. She answered him as she always had, thoroughly, leaving out the part that mattered. She hated herself for it. She did it anyway. The phone calls continued, and then they met for coffee. She told herself it was a simple thing, a midday hour between two adults who had once been close and could surely manage the geography of a coffee shop table. She told herself this on the drive over, in the silver car, wearing a pale green dress Raymond had bought her last spring that she'd always particularly liked. Oliver was already there, and he stood when she came in, and they did the brief calculation of whether to hug, and he opened his arms, and she stepped into them, and the smell of him, cold air and something warm she had never managed to forget, hit her so completely that she had to hold on a second longer than she intended just to find her footing. They sat down. The conversation started carefully, the way people handle things they know are delicate. Then it loosened, then it opened entirely. He showed her photographs of his current projects on his phone, a community library in east of the city, the conversion of a Victorian factory into something warm and livable, a school extension that looked like it had been drawn by someone who remembered what it felt like to be a child. She asked questions she genuinely wanted answers to, and he gave them in the specific, animated way of someone who had found what they were built to do. "You love it," she said. "Every day," he said simply. Then, "How are you, Rose?" "Not fine, actually." She looked at him. Nobody had asked her that in a long time, not like that, not with the implication that a real answer was wanted and would be received without judgment. She started, stopped, tried again. "I'm comfortable. I'm well provided for. My children are wonderful." She looked at her hands. "I am the loneliest I have ever been." The words came out of her before she could curate them, and she felt the exposure of them immediately, like stepping into cold air without a coat. Oliver was very still. "Rose," he said. "Don't," she said quickly. "Don't look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I've just confirmed something you've been carrying." He exhaled slowly. "Have I?" "You know you have." She looked up. "This doesn't change anything. I want to be honest about that." "I know," he said, quiet, not pushing. She looked at him across the table in the afternoon light, this man who had found her at a university event and remembered her name like it mattered, and she felt something in her chest that she recognized as precisely the frequency she had been searching for 5 years and could not reach anywhere in her actual life. They stayed 2 hours. When they finally stood to leave, she put her coat on and he held the door, and she walked past him, close in the doorway, and he caught her arm very gently, and she turned and he was looking at her with something that was entirely without pretense, and he leaned forward and he kissed her. It was not a dramatic kiss. It was quiet and careful and devastatingly familiar, the kind of kiss that knows exactly what it's doing because it has done it before. And she kissed him back, and for the length of those few seconds, every nerve in her body remembered what warmth actually felt like, what it felt like to be held by someone who wanted to be holding you specifically, and not simply because you were there. Then she stepped back. She pressed her fingertips to her mouth. She looked at him. "I have to go." he said. I know. She walked to her car. She sat in it for a long time without moving, her hands in her lap, looking at nothing in particular. She thought about Raymond at home, efficient and quiet, buying her things she hadn't asked for, touching her with the same reliable schedule, never once asking her what was inside the beautiful life he had built around her. She thought about the kiss. She thought, I cannot remember the last time I felt anything like that. Then she started the engine and drove home and parked in the driveway and sat in another 5 minutes before going inside. Raymond was in the kitchen. He looked up when she came in. Good day? He said. Yes, she said. Fine. She hung up her coat and the lie settled around her like a second wound.
The dates continued. That was the honest word for them, though she did not use it even inside her own head for the first several weeks. They were lunches, she told herself. Coffee. She was seeing an old friend. The children stayed with their nanny, a warm and completely incurious woman named Beverly, who had been with the household for 2 years and asked no questions about where Rose went in the afternoons. Rose drove to restaurants and parks and galleries in her silver car, in her beautiful dresses, looking every inch the well-kept wife of a successful man, which she was, and she sat across from Oliver and was more fully herself than she had been in 5 years. He made her laugh. He always had. Not the polite, managed laugh that she produced at dinner parties, but the real thing, the helpless kind that arrived without warning. He asked her opinions and listened to the actual answers, not the appropriate versions. He talked to her about his work and about the city and about a book he'd been reading and about his nephew who had apparently decided to become a professional footballer and was currently losing the argument. He was warm and easy and entirely present in the way that Raymond, for all his many qualities, had never learned to be. They didn't speak about what they were doing. They both knew what they were doing. The kiss in the doorway was not repeated, not because the desire wasn't there on both sides, and they both understood that clearly, but because there was a line they were both, perhaps self-deceptively, treating as still intact. The calls continued late at night after the household slept. Sometimes they talked for an hour, sometimes for 3. Sometimes she just lay there in the dark listening to his voice and felt guilty and warm and alive and guilty again all at the same time. Raymond said nothing. She watched him watching her and said nothing either. Their life at home had a new quality to it, a careful politeness, a surface maintained with slightly more deliberateness on both sides. Raymond continued to be Raymond, providing, functional, managing the household the way he managed everything, leaving gifts on the counter, eating dinner at the table, giving her the scheduled version of closeness that had always been the only version he knew how to give. She continued to smile in the right places and be present where presence was required. She was a good mother. She was, on paper, a good wife. Inside, she was a woman standing on a shoreline, trying to decide whether to stay on dry land or wade in knowing she couldn't swim. She was running out of shore. The thing about keeping a secret in a life that looks perfect, Rose discovered, is that there is nowhere to put the weight of it. She couldn't talk to her mother. Harriet had loved Raymond from the first dinner he'd eaten at their table and loved him more with each passing year. She referenced him in conversation with the easy pride of a woman who had made a good recommendation. Frederick had built his career on Raymond's initial help and felt a loyalty that was genuine and unshakable. Her father read his newspaper every morning with clear eyes and a full stomach and would not have understood the question she was trying to ask. Aunt Cynthia was the one who had introduced them and considered the marriage to be one of her finest achievements. There was no version of any conversation she could have with her family that didn't end with her feeling like a woman who had been handed everything and was complaining about the temperature of it. She started carrying the weight alone and found that a person can only do that for so long before it shows. It showed in small ways, a tiredness that sleep didn't fix, a tendency to go quiet in dinner in a way that was slightly different from her usual quiet. The pause before she answered simple questions, just a fraction longer than usual, as though she was sorting through several possible truths before selecting the safest one. Raymond noticed these things. She knew he did. He watched her with his still, dark, unreadable eyes and said nothing, and his silence on the matter was somehow louder than any confrontation would have been. One evening, when both children were in bed and Raymond was in his study, Rose sat alone in the sitting room and looked around at the beautiful furniture and the carefully chosen art and the thick curtains and the flowers he'd had delivered on Friday, as he always did, and she felt something she could only describe as suffocation at sea, drowning in something that was supposed to be nourishing. She needed someone to talk to. She thought for a long time about who, and then she thought of Mama Winifred. Winifred Cole was 71 years old, lived alone since her husband's death 6 years prior in a house full of plants and photographs and the particular atmospheric warmth of a woman who had simply decided not to be cold. She attended the same church as Rose's mother and had, over the years, appointed herself a kind of general grandmother to any younger woman who came within her orbit. She calls her on a Wednesday afternoon. "I need to talk to someone who isn't connected to any of it." "Come on Saturday," Mama Winifred said, without asking what it was. "Come for lunch. I'll make pepper soup." Rose went on Saturday. She sat at Mama Winifred's kitchen table in the warmth of that plant-filled house and told her everything, from Oliver at the university, to Raymond and what he'd done for the family, to the marriage and its strange, comfortable, airless quality, to the bookshop encounter and the messages, and the coffee and the dates, and the doorway and the kiss, and the calls and the way she lay awake at night, not knowing which version of her life she was actually living anymore. Mama Winifred listened with the focused attention of someone who had decided that listening was a skill worth developing. She did not interrupt. She did not shift in her chair. She did not give the small sounds of someone waiting to respond. She simply listened all the way to the end, until Rose had run out of words and sat there in the warm kitchen with her hands wrapped around a bowl of pepper soup and her eyes stinging. Then Mama Winifred nodded slowly. She said. Rose waited. "Let me tell you something," Mama Winifred said. "When I was 34 years old, my husband and I were not getting on. Not in a bad way, not in a way that anyone outside could see, but inside we were two people sitting in different rooms inside the same house. And there was a man." She paused. "A kind man who saw me, who laughed at the same things I did, who made me feel for the first time in years like a person rather than a role." She looked at Rose. "I almost went with it." "What stopped you?" Rose said. "Nothing in the end stopped me going towards it. What stopped me was realizing that I wasn't running towards him. I was running away from myself." She folded her hands on the table. "I had disappeared inside my marriage, Rose. Not because my husband was terrible. He wasn't. He was a good man with his own limitations. But because I had stopped being a person and become only a function, and the man on the outside felt like an escape." She paused. "But escaping to someone else doesn't make you find yourself. It just gives you somewhere different to be lost." Rose looked at her. "I'm not saying your feelings aren't real," Mama Winifred continued. "They are. Every one of them. What you feel for Oliver is real, and what you feel in your marriage is real, and the emptiness is real." She reached across and covered Rose's hand with hers. "But the question you are trying to solve is not Oliver or Raymond. The question you are actually asking is, who am I? What do I want for myself? Not for your mother or your brother or your father or your children, for you." She looked at her steadily. "And that question, my darling, no man can answer." Rose sat with this for a long time. "What did you do?" she asked finally. "With the man?" "I told him I couldn't see him anymore, not because I stopped caring for him, but because I chose myself first. I went back to the thing I had abandoned when I got married. I had been training to be a nurse, did I tell you? And I finished it. And I started working, and I became, slowly, someone I recognized again. I smiled. When I was someone I recognized, I could see my husband differently too. We had 6 more years before he died, and they were the best, because I brought a whole person into the room instead of a role." She squeezed Rose's hand. "Start there," she said. Find yourself. Everything else will clarify. Rose drove home in the silver car in the early evening light. She drove carefully, with both hands on the wheel, the way she did when she was thinking hard about something. She thought about Mama Winifred's words all the way home. She thought about them for several days after, and slowly, quietly, something began to shift.
She started with the marketing course she had abandoned. She opened the laptop late one night and picked up where she'd left off, and spent 2 hours absorbed in something that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs. And when she closed it, she felt, for the first time in a very long time, a faint but real sense of direction. She continued. She enrolled in a second course, project management, and discovered she had a natural instinct for the work. She started getting up an hour earlier, sitting at the kitchen table in the quiet before anyone needed her, building something that was entirely her own. She joined a women's professional circle on Thursday evenings. The first time she went, she arrived with the specific anxiety of a person who has been out of circulation long enough to forget how they behave in rooms full of strangers. She came home feeling slightly more solid than she had going in. She signed up to volunteer at a literacy program for adult women, 3 evenings a month in a community hall nearby. The women she taught were mostly older, working hard, coming to class after long days. She liked them enormously. She liked being useful in a way that was specific and real, not decorative. Raymond noticed the changes without commenting on them. She could feel his attention differently now, less like observation and more like bewilderment. A man watching a plant he had always kept in one window beginning to turn toward another. She wasn't doing it to bother him. She was doing it because Mama Winifred had told her to start with herself, and she was discovering, one evening at a time, that there was more of herself than she had remembered. Oliver was still there. That was the complicated part. The messages continued, the warmth continued. She was honest enough to know what she felt for him hadn't diminished simply because she decided to focus on her own life. If anything, becoming more herself made the feeling more precise. She could see clearly now the specific shape of what she'd had with him and what she'd never found in its absence. She went to see him twice more. Both times she drove to a restaurant. Both times she was more herself in those 2 hours than in most of her days. Both times she drove home in the silver car with the complicated mixture of warmth and guilt and longing that had become the weather of this period of her life. She was not managing it. She knew she was not managing it. She knew with certainty on a Tuesday afternoon when she arrived home from lunch with Oliver. He had held her hand across the table, and she had let him, and when they left, he had held her in the car park for a long moment, his chin on the top of her head, and she pulled into her driveway and looked up and saw Raymond at the window. He was not watching her with anger. He was watching her with something much worse, the expression of a man who had been waiting for something he'd hoped wouldn't come, and who could see it had come, and who was simply very tired. She went inside. He was sitting in the armchair by the window. The armchair by the window was where she sat. He never sat there. "The children are with Beverly," he said. "I thought we should talk." "Yes," she said, "we should." She sat across from him. "Tell me," he said. Not an accusation, a request. She looked at her husband, this man who had given her family back its future, who had provided everything without being asked twice, who had looked at her on their wedding day with the wonder of someone who couldn't believe his luck, and she thought about everything she had never said. She said it, all of it. The hollow place from the beginning, the feeling of invisibility inside the beautiful life, the intimacy that felt like duty, being provided for without being known. Oliver, not everything, but enough to be honest. And then the thing she hadn't planned to say. "I don't think I've ever shown you who I actually am," she said. Her voice broke slightly. "I came into this marriage performing the person I thought you'd bought. And we've been 2 performances, Raymond, having a polished, well-furnished conversation for 5 years. She pressed on. "I'm so tired of not being known, in my own home." The room was completely quiet.
And then Raymond Ashford, who had never in 5 years been anything other than composed, made a sound she would remember for the rest of her life. A quiet, broken sound, the sound of a man whose careful structure had given way. He pressed his hand over his face. His shoulders shook. He wept. Rose stared at him. She had never seen Raymond cry. She watched him come undone, and something cracked open in her, too. Not quite for him, not yet, but for the waste of it. The years of two people being lonely in the same house, neither one ever saying, "I am not actually here." She crossed the room. She sat beside him and put her hand on his back. "I've known," he said finally, into his hands. "I've known from the beginning that you came to me for other reasons. I told myself I'd earn it, work hard enough, provide enough, and eventually—" He stopped. "I was so afraid that if I asked, you'd tell me it was never going to be enough. Is it ever going to be enough?" She sat with that question. "I don't know, honestly. I think that depends on what we're willing to do." He raised his head. His eyes were red. His face was raw and more real than she had ever seen it. "I want to know you," he said. "I've wanted to, and I didn't know how to ask. I thought the things I gave you were a language you'd understand." "They were a language. I understood it, but I needed you to learn another one too." He looked at her for a long time. "Teach me," he said. The counselor was Dr. Nora Fielding. In the third session, she asked Raymond what he was most afraid of. He sat with the question longer than he'd ever sat with anything. "That I confused love with logistics," he said. "That I thought if everything was in order, she would feel held, and never once asked if she did." Rose turned to look at him. "Held," she said quietly. "That's the word. Yes, I never felt held. I know that now. I want to learn that." Dr. Fielding watched them discover each other across her small table through the clumsy, frequently painful work of two people who had never properly spoken, learning finally how to speak. Raymond was awkward at it. He made attempts and misjudged the angle and tried again. He learned to ask questions he didn't have the answers to sit in the room with her discomfort instead of immediately reaching for the solution. Rose learned to say what she needed before she resented him for not knowing it. Neither one of them was graceful about it. It was the most important work she had ever done. She ended things with Oliver in February. "Oliver, I can't see you again, not for the reason you might assume, but I have children and a husband who is trying, and I cannot be present while standing in the doorway of something else. What I feel for you hasn't changed. It never quite did. But becoming more myself made the feeling more precise. She could see clearly now the specific shape of what she'd had with him and what she'd never found in its absence. I hope you find someone who gets all of you, not the parts allowed because someone else's circumstances make room for them. All of you. You deserve that." He replied 2 hours later. "Rose, I'll be all right. Go be whole." She kept the message for a while. Then she deleted it. Oliver, she heard later from Aunt Cynthia's exhaustible network, had met someone, a woman named Patricia, an urban planner. He was happy. She examined what she felt at this news carefully and identified it, to her genuine relief, as simply gladness, the way you're glad when someone who deserved good things gets them. She told Raymond. He looked at her. "And?" she said. "And nothing. I just thought you should know." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes," she said, and meant it. He reached across the table and found her hand. It was not Oliver's hand, not the knowing electric warmth of it. It was Raymond's hand, broad and unpracticed in tenderness, reaching because he had yearned, slowly, painfully, in Dr. Fielding's small room, to reach. She held on. On a Saturday morning in spring, Rose sat at the kitchen table working on a proposal for her fourth client. She had built in the previous year a small consulting practice, working in the hours the children were at school, when Raymond came downstairs. He made her a second coffee without being asked, set it beside her work without disturbing her, picked up Sam and took him into the garden. She watched them through the window. her husband, in weekend clothes and without his usual armor, throwing a ball very seriously for their boy, who chased it with the total concentration of a child whose whole world is the thing directly ahead of him. She turned back to her work. She was someone she recognized at this table, the course taker, the volunteer, the consultant, the woman in the Thursday circle who had opinions and shared them, the woman who drove her silver car not because her husband provided it, but because she had learned finally to inhabit her own life without apology. Petra appeared at her elbow. "Mummy, what are you working on?" "A project," Rose said. "A company needs help telling people about themselves." Petra considered this. Like talking? Something like that. Petra wandered away, satisfied. Rose looked back out into the garden. Raymond had sat on the bench, and Sam had climbed into his lap, and they were talking about something, she couldn't hear what, and Sam laughed his full, uncomplicated laugh, and Raymond smiled, and it was the unguarded version, the one she had to work hard to find, but that she now knew was genuinely there. She thought about Mama Winifred in her warm kitchen. The question is not Oliver or Raymond. The question is, who are you? She thought, I know the beginning of the answer now. She finished the proposal and sent it.